There's always something new to see at the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art in Hartford, Connecticut. Discover the stories and works of women artists from the early Renaissance to contemporary through our special exhibitions featuring Italian women artists, Alice Neal, and Christina Forer. On view now at the Wadsworth, your place to experience amazing works of art.
Hello, everyone. Wow, here we are together again. I think I might cry. You are here for really an historic moment. This is our first program back in the theater since March of 2020. And what a great occasion it is as we come together to celebrate some incredible women artists. I'm Ann Butler-Rice. I'm the Director of Education here at the Wadsworth Atheneum, and I'm very excited to welcome you tonight. Thank you all for joining us, whether in person or on Zoom. We have about 100 people joining us through a webinar tonight. So wherever you are, we appreciate it. I also know there's a big group of faculty and students from Trinity out there, so a big shout out to you too. Oliver and I are not wearing our masks for my introduction and for Oliver's talk, but we would ask you all to keep your masks on during the program. We just opened a gorgeous exhibition, By Her Hand, Artemisia Gentileschi and Women Artists in Italy from 1500 to 1800. And I hope you've all had a chance to take a good long look upstairs. If you didn't have enough time tonight, you have until January 9th. Please visit often to relish the creativity and accomplishments of about 18 women in Italy who have been largely overlooked for hundreds of years. You can take a docent-guided tour. You can listen to our mobile audio guide and take a look at our calendar, please, for other related programs. At the end of the month on October 28th, we bring Elizabeth Cropper, Dean Emerita of the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art. Her lecture will focus largely on Artemisia Gentileschi and how she persisted against many obstacles. And while you're here, I do want to take the opportunity to invite you back next week for a major lecture with the artist whose work is featured in a massive installation outside our front door, as well as inside our front door. We hope you'll join us for the Emily Hall Tremaine Lecture in Contemporary Art with artist Leonardo Drew on October 14th. So just a week away, mark your calendars and come back. And now to introduce Oliver. Our colleague Oliver Tostmann organized this spectacular exhibition along with co-curator Yves Strassman-Flancer through the Detroit Institute of Arts. Oliver is the curator of European paintings and sculpture at the Wadsworth and played a role in the acquisition of the Wadsworth's painting by Artemisia Gentileschi shortly after his arrival in 2014. He also worked on the reinstallation of the European galleries and our major exhibition, Monsters and Myths, in 2018. So please join me in welcoming Oliver.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I haven't seen this as filled as it is now for a long time, even going way before March last year. So I could not be more excited, and I could not be more thrilled to talk to you tonight about our first exhibition here at the Wadsworth Atheneum, dedicated to historic women artists. The title is By Her Hand, Artemisia Gentileschi and Italian women artists from 1500 to 1800. And you will see that during the course of my talk, that Artemisia indeed plays a prominent role in that show, but that the show is by no means about Artemisia on her own. This is a show that is set up to celebrate all the women artists out there in Italy at that time. There were amazing forces, there were amazing talents, they had been too long overlooked, and this is now the time here for us on the East Coast to look with fresh eyes on what they created. During the course of our preparations for the show, I want to show you this, the entry wall. During the course of the preparations for this exhibition, we received some fantastic loans from private lenders, but also from public museums all across the United States, along the East Coast, from the Midwest, the West Coast, from the Montreal Museum in Canada, and then also from European institutions, namely in England and Italy. And I think this just creates an incredibly fascinating body of works. We'll show about 20 women artists here. They are represented with a wild mix of large and small works. We show paintings, we show pastels, we show miniatures, we show drawings, works on paper, and so forth. So you get the whole variety of their activities at that time. As I already indicated earlier on, but as we all know, women and women artists in Italy at that time had many obstacles to overcome. They were marginalized, they were sometimes dismissed, and until today, they are still grossly understudied. And I think that this exhibition, I do hope that this exhibition is giving you an opportunity to see, to discover, and to explore their artistic voices, to see how they gained artistic independence, how they were able to carve out their careers that in some cases were not part of the mainstream course of art that artists took, but nevertheless, women were just able, they were nimble, and they just found these side paths into the artistic professions. Many of you have seen the exhibition just upstairs, but for those of you who had not that chance or opportunity, I would like to say that these are the first three works that you see. So once you step into the show, you cannot miss this big yellow wall right in the center. And in a way, this arrangement of three works by Artemisia Gentileschi, these three portraits there, they anchor the whole show. They are the kernel of the exhibition, and in some ways they are also the origins of the exhibition. You can see in the center, you can see our own self-portrait as a lute player by Artemisia. And we acquired this just a few years ago, as Anne said, in 2014. And for the past, I would say, 2 decades, Artemisia's fame has risen to unprecedented heights. She is becoming better and better known. She is probably at this point by far the best studied woman artist of this group of artists that we are speaking about tonight. And she is becoming, and she has gained a name recognition that is only comparable to the very famous male artists, to the most famous male artists of her time, Caravaggio, Rembrandt, and so on. Because of this notoriety, because of this fame, it is surprising, and it speaks to the field that it was only in 2017 that there was a major discovery of a very important work of her, which is this work on the left side here, which shows Artemisia Gentileschi in the guise of Saint Catherine. This painting was immediately bought by the National Gallery in London and entered their collections as the very first work by that artist. And as you can already see here, that there are close relations between this work, between our work, and then a third work that is now at the Uffizi Galleries in Florence. And I will speak about those relationships in a little bit. But that acquisition at the National Gallery, which set up its own course of investigations in our painting, in London's painting, that sort of stood at the very origins of the show back in 2017. At the same time, and equally important, we were hearing then nearby on an everyday basis news about the Me Too movement. And I do feel that that really played a role in not only thinking about women artists, perhaps a little bit differently, but also just sort of urging every one of us here to see that this is really something that we need to do at the Wadsworth Atheneum. We need to give historic women artists the stage that they deserve. And then, of course, because every exhibition is the child of its own time, we were also impacted, surprise, surprise, by the Corona pandemic and had to postpone our show for 1 year. And along that, we did lose some wonderful loans, but on the other side, we also won some others that I will mention shortly. Beyond these factors, these timely factors, I would like to point out a major influence on our exhibition, which is Linda Nochlind's famous article, "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" written and published in 1971. You can already see here, this is a 50th anniversary edition that doesn't happen too often with articles written by art historians, that they get these editions. But this is something really important and something that shaped our exhibition through and through. In this essay, she dissected important concepts of Western art. She questioned the notion of great men. She questioned the concept of genius, which always revolves around man. And she highlighted the many problems for women at that time to act in the same way as artists as their male peers did. So she questioned the institutional and structural barriers that created these obstacles for women artists to succeed professionally. I will speak in a little bit about our own institution here, and I will just give you a sort of glance into our own history and the question how we dealt with women and women artists here at the Wadsworth Atheneum. Linda Nochlind's article was not the only very important product of her work. Just a couple of years later, in the mid-1970s, she created, together with art historian Anne Sutherland Harris, an important exhibition that provided a survey of the works of women artists from 1550 to 1950. That exhibition traveled across the United States and was enormously successful. I cannot tell you how often I looked into its catalog that was produced along the show. It is a seminal work, and the perspective on the activities across centuries, across artistic regions, it is just mind-staggering. I wanted to show you here that, of course, just to illustrate the debt to that show, that you see the very prominent role of this painting by Artemisia Gentileschi that is owned by our partner institution, the Detroit Institute of Arts. It's her very famous depiction of Judith. And here you see in our exhibition how the very same painting plays an equally important role in the show. Since then, since the mid-1970s, there had been shows about women artists. I would just like to mention a show in Washington, at the Washington, DC, at the National Museum for Women in the Arts, where we have seen Italian women artists from the same period as here in 2007. Likewise, in the subsequent years, there were shows about specific artists. I'm just mentioning there were several shows about Artemisia Gentileschi, but then there were also important shows at the Prado about Lavinia Fontana, Sofonisba Anguissola. The whole field is just very dynamic. And during the past years, we have seen this spate of exhibitions across Europe. And now here at the Wadsworth, we are the first one that in the United States that looks now in 2021 with fresh eyes on Italian women artists of the Renaissance and Baroque. I would like to mention in this context that this is not the first, this is the first historic show for us here at the Wadsworth. The same is true for the Detroit Institute of Arts, but it is also the first time in any encyclopedic art museum in the United States that historic Italian women artists are celebrated with a show. Something that struck me right from the start is just the pace with which we gain insights into artists. One example is Osla Madelina Katja, rather lesser known name among these women artists. She was an artist nun working in northern Italy. And back in 2017, 2018, when we started to think about this exhibition, there was only one work by her in the United States that had entered a collection. That is this still life of flowers, which we show upstairs, which just entered the collections of Yale University in 2018. It had just come on the market a year before, and so it was very fresh, and there was just no other work by her available. Just 3 years later, in 2020, another work was bought by here from someone in the United States, a private collector, which is the Mary Magdalene. And so suddenly with that work, we could have add an important different facet of Katja's work to our show. And then just a short while later, a couple months later, we heard the news that the Metropolitan Museum in New York received a wonderful gift of 3 paintings by Magdalena Katja, coming from a private collection in New York, about which I had no knowledge prior. Unfortunately, that gift was a little bit too late for our exhibition, but nevertheless, I think that this story just illuminates about how quickly this field is changing, about how quickly works are coming up on the art market and are surfacing up, and then are bought, and sometimes by public collections, and with that being made accessible to the public and for us, for our studies of women artists. Just a very quick comment on our entry wall. We really wanted to give every single artist in the show, every single woman artist in the show, a space, and wanted to acknowledge the work and the career of each single artist. And so we decided to arrange them all on the wall. And we totally acknowledge that some of them are probably virtually unknown to most of you, whereas some other artists like Lavinia Fontana or Artemisia Gentileschi may be a little bit better known to you. For any one of you who has questions about the biographies of these artists, we produced a little handout that you can all get up in the exhibition space, take with you, and those guides give you the most important information about the lives and careers of these artists. Now, I just mentioned that the show really started with our acquisition of Artemisia's great self-portrait here in 2014. The painting entered our collection as the first major painting by a woman artist of the Renaissance and Baroque periods. And given our strong profile in that area, I could not help myself to ask, how can that be that it took us so long to make a major purchase in this field? And this leads us to now a little segue that I would like to lead you in, which is about our institutional history, which is about the Wadsworth Athenaeum's history. And the questions are, how did we acquire or how did we display in the past, in our long past, women artists? And as a second part, how did or which role were women playing in our institution's history? We are all very proud about our history. The museum was founded in 1842. It is the oldest still operating public art museum in the country. And with that long history, I think it may stand as something representative for many other encyclopedic art museums here in the United States. By looking back at its past, by sort of asking these questions, I can give you a short answer about the role of women and the role of men here at this place. I can say that for most of the time, predominantly, men have run the show here at the Wadsworth Athenaeum. There were moments when women entered the museum, either on various levels, but given to everything together, the Wadsworth was slow to allow women to attain any high rank here at the museum. On the other, just to give you an example, we were founded in 1842, and it took us until 1955 to elect the first woman as a trustee on the board of the Wadsworth Athenaeum. To close the circle, it was only in 1995 that that a woman became the first board president of the Wadsworth Athenaeum. And it was only in the year 2000 that we had our first woman as a director of the Wadsworth Athenaeum. That all being said, there are also some bright spots. Oops. Let's turn to that. One of the earliest exhibitions at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in 1860 was dedicated to a woman artist. It was Rosa Bonner. She was French. She was contemporaneous. She was not historic. Whoever went to the Met, into the fantastic collection of 19th century art, probably has not missed to see this monumental painting. It's one of the grandest paintings at the Met. It shows this typical subject that was perfected by Rosa Bonner, these horses in motion. People loved that. Rosa Bonner at that time in the 1850s, 1860s was an international celebrity. And so her works came over to the United States and toured here. And one of the stations was Hartford, the Wadsworth Athenaeum. You would think that this was a safe choice by the museum to display because of the very subject and because of the international reputation of the artist. I found a critic, a contemporaneous critic, that lets us think that there was a lot of misogynism out there at that time. And I need to quote this. It's really good. All right. Quote, "Why should there not be more Rosa Bonners? Art is open to women as much as men. But up to the time of Rosa Bonner, there has never been a female painter worth remembering." Interesting in our context today. "Women have an unquestioned right to distinguish themselves in art. Yet it is rare to find a woman with sufficient artistic talent to make a design for a cap ribbon." I leave it with that. In the following years, there were a few works that were accessioned in our collections, that came into our collections. They were mostly, or yes, predominantly by American artists. You see here this painting by Jane Stewart. And then we received later on, around 1900, this wonderful Zenobia by Harriet Goodhue Hosmer, along with some other sculptures by that amazing artist. But I should point out that these works were not acquired by the Wadsworth Athenaeum. They were received as gifts or donations. At the same time, I also would like to mention that there were a number of women in the community who played a major indirectly a major role on the Wadsworth. Think about Elizabeth Colt, for instance, the industrialist that bequeathed her art collection and other means to us at the Wadsworth. We profited tremendously from her largesse. The first, or one of the first acquisitions of any woman artists at the Wadsworth Athenaeum was in 1923. You see it on the right side. It's a pastel by Mary Cassatt, and it shows this wonderful little child holding a dog. And that was really a momentous decision here on our side at the Wadsworth. It was a strategic acquisition to buy this work. There was a lot of money involved, and also, according to the notes, there was some deliberation on what to purchase. The director at that time was our first director, Frank Butler Gay. He served here from 1911 to 1927. He was not an art historian, he was a librarian. And you would think that he, as director, played a major role in the acquisition of this Mary Cassatt painting. And yet, I have another quote for you, equally interesting, because in 1917, Frank Butler gave a talk at a local artists club here in Hartford. And the title of the talk was, I quote, "Why Women Are Not Artists." And in this talk, he set out his reasoning, and he explains that, that the very psychology of women makes them unsuitable to become artists. And then he goes into details, and he says about portraiture, and I quote, that women are not suited for portraiture because the character behind a face is too complex for a woman to understand. Because of his misogynistic views, I have not an answer how much he was involved in this acquisition. A major role may have been played by Florence Paulberger, who was one of the first chief curators here at the institution. She arrived in Hartford from Boston in 1918 and then stayed on here at the Wadsworth as curator until 1967 for 49 years. I haven't found any other employee here who has served for such a long time. And she must have been remarkable in many regards. The profession of curators at that time in the 1920s was still developing. She was a registrar, she was an archivist, she just held several heads, and she must have been a major force. And so we know that she adored Mary Cassatt. And so I think it is likely that she played an important role in acquiring the wonderful pastel by Mary Cassatt in 1923. The direction of the Wadsworth Athenaeum changed a little bit with the following director in 1927, which was Chick Austin, who stayed on here until the mid-1940s. And he really opened up the Wadsworth to international art, namely European art. And he staged one of the most important and earliest exhibitions about Italian Baroque art here at the Wadsworth in 1930. That was really a seminal moment here in the United States. Baroque art now received this major stage at the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and it became something of a sort of mainstream school that had been dismissed until that time. We had most art historians, most museum directors were into the Renaissance, but not into the Baroque. And that changed with Chick Austin. Chick Austin set out to acquire all sorts of marvelous artworks. And he is the first director who thought to acquire a major work by an Italian woman artist. In 1942, he bought for $2,500. That was a lot of money at that time. He bought this wonderful still life that is up in the galleries, in the permanent galleries, by what he believed was Fede Galizia. And this work for a long, long time was the only work by Fede Galizia here in this country. And with a rise in scholarship, with the rise in understanding about her artistic profile, scholars in the 1960s decided that this attribution is not cannot be upheld any longer. But nevertheless, Chick Austin bought or thought to believed to buy a woman artist in 1942, and now the painting is given to the so-called master of the Hartford still lifes. Austin was also played an important role in bringing major talents, majorly talented women to the Wadsworth Athenaeum. Now, I just would like to point out two of them. The first one is Iris Berry. She was employed at MoMA at that time. She was a critic of movies, and he worked with her together to conceive the first series of movies ever shown at an American art museum, and which was right here at this place. So they both wrote history here at the Wadsworth with their collaboration on this project. Another woman that he brought in was Nellie Howland Bunce, who worked as his assistant. We do not know exactly what she did, but she was part of the inner circle, and therefore she was definitely a driving force in steering the Wadsworth Athenaeum towards a encyclopedic collection that opens itself up to European art, both old and new. And since Chick Austin left in the 1940s, especially in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, the Wadsworth, of course, has had many distinguished women working here, many distinguished curators. And I just would like to highlight one of them, which is Andrea Millerkeller, who worked here starting in the late 1960s. She was responsible for setting up the wonderful Matrix series of contemporary art, but she also brought to the museum Mile Laderman Ukele with her famous performance, Washing Tracks Maintenance, that was taking place here at the Wadsworth in 1973, which was a really important moment. And just to round this up, in the 1980s, there was another remarkable woman serving here as a curator. It was Barbara Hudson. She was born in Alabama, but grew up in Bristol, Connecticut, and joined us in 1989 as the first curator of African-American art. At the same time, she was also the director of the Amistad, and so she played an enormously important role here at the Wadsworth as well. And so, so we now come back to our self-portrait, which, as I said earlier, was bought only in 2014. And I do believe that it is not a happenstance, that it was bought under the directorship of another woman director here at the Wadsworth under Susan Talbot's directorship. The three paintings are now united for the first time here in the United States, which is an exciting moment for us. They show St. Catherine, or self-portrait as St. Catherine to the left, our self-portrait in the center, and a portrait of St. Catherine to the right. Artemisia set out to paint them at a very early moment in her career. She was in Florence. She had to carve out her career. She had to find patrons. She was on the rise, but she was not on the top yet. She wanted to rise further. And that was the time when she started painting these three paintings. You can already see all three paintings have similar sizes. They have same poses. And in each occasion, she painted herself in different ways. Now, what is endlessly fascinating is when you start comparing these paintings, and that was exactly what happened after 2017, after London had bought its painting, conservators started working on it, and they overlaid images of both paintings. And they discovered that they're nearby identical. When you look at the position of the noses, the eyes, the chin, the mouth, the ears, the neckline, and so forth, it's nearby identical. And she must have, or that sort of made us think that Artemisia must have worked from the same model. She must have applied that model on the canvas, and then she must have found a way to circumscribe the outlines of the model on the canvas. And that was a method that was very much in usage by her father, Orazio Gentileschi, who's also represented in our collection. And this shows you how a woman artist looked very closely at the practice of her father, which is a theme on its own that you will see over and over again in our exhibition, because women artists were simply so dependent on this artistic exposure. And just to give you another comparison, this is the Uffizi piece on the left side. You can see when you compare them against similar sizes, how she shifted very gingerly the lighting, how she shifted the direction of the look, and then of course the accessories, but they are very similar paintings. And with these discoveries, the Uffizi galleries also started an inquiry into its own painting, and they made an X-ray. And you can see here, it's always hard to see. You can already see a little bit of the outlines about how this underpainting that comes up here on the X-ray, how that differs from the final version of the St. Catherine. Look here, look, she's wearing a turban, very similar to the turban that she's wearing in our painting, but also in the London painting. And then maybe you can see here the eyes. The eyes are, she played with the eyes. They're here looking straight at us. This is an outline that was inserted by my colleague Alan Kosanovic, our conservator, to help you a little bit to read this X-ray in a clearer way. And here you see how much the underpainting of the Uffizi portrait resembles the painting in London. And so we have this wonderful sequence of paintings that were painted at the same time. We do not know exactly how she worked on them, whether she started with one painting and then she would finish it and then she would go further. It is probably more likely that she started with one painting, went over to another painting, went back to the first painting, and so forth. I think this is a wonderful insight into the artistic practice of Artemisia Gentileschi. And it shows us a lot about her training, as I said, with Orazio. It shows us a lot about her working methods. It shows us a lot about her artistic identity by inserting her own features in the paintings. But it also shows us a little bit about her business acumen, about her self-promotional skills in this environment of Florence at that time. And from this wall, we now sort of dive into several sections of the show. And the first one is dedicated to the training and to the question, which obstacles were women facing at that time. We have here on the left side, we have Giorgio Vasari's Vita. Giorgio Vasari was this eminent art writer. He wrote this very important text about the lives of eminent artists at his time. There are 160 some lives in total, and only one of them is dedicated to a woman artist. You can see her here, Properzio de Rossi, sculptor from Bologna. What is fascinating when you read that text, he sort of makes all these allusions to her domestic qualities. He makes allusion, or he tells us about her frustrated romantic love life, stories that you would not hear one about male artists. On the right side, you see this wonderful print after a design by Carlo Maratti. He also an eminent art figure at that time. He was presiding over the Accademia di San Luca, the art academy in Rome. And he shows us an idealized art academy at that time. And he shows us experienced artists, how they train young artists and how young artists, they set up to train their skills as draftsmen. They do all these sketches here after famous sculptures. And yet once you start looking, you will not see a single woman in this print, because women were simply not offered this opportunity to train together with male artists. And yet our show also shows, or it shows and it demonstrates how inventive women were at that time to find their own means to practice the arts. As I said, drawing was an incredibly important practice, and so women were not allowed to draw in the same way as male artists. But in some cases, like here, this is Marietta Robusti, Tintoretto's daughter. She trained. She had access to her father's workshop, and so she started training her skills by drawing these busts that were in the workshop. Then there's another artist, Elisabetta Sirani. She's a wonderful draftswoman, one of the most prolific draftswomen of the 17th century, and she must have gained an education in drawing by her artist father as well. Something that also stands out among women artists is that a lot of them were exposed to knitwork, knitwork of all sorts. They had to do that over years, that specific practice. You can see this here, and it's one of the open questions, how much that practice may have informed the young artists. They were introduced to this practice at a young age, 8 or 9 years old, and then they practice it throughout their teenage years, and it must have had some impact on their talents as later artists. And probably the most famous artist who was exposed to that practice early on was Wasaba Kayeda. She became famous for her pastels. This is a beautiful example in our exhibition. She also created miniatures. This is not by her. This is by another artist, but this also shows you the importance of these genres and techniques that are a little bit overlooked these days, but at that time they were eminent, they were very important, and they were especially important for women artists on their career tracks. Now, coming back to Artemisia, and this self-portrait by her just shows you another possible pathway for women artists into the art. It shows you her deliberate play with her image, with her own, with her self-imagery. She is showing us here that she's very conscious about the way, about her position as a female artist at that time. I mean, just look at her. She's the way how she presents herself as this young woman in her early 20s. She's wonderfully dressed, but she's also showing us her décolleté. She's showing us a wonderful, elegant turban, some makeup on the cheeks. This is definitely someone who knew she was attractive, and this is someone who knows how to attract and how to seduce a male viewer with this self-portrait here. And this whole importance of self-imagery and likenesses of female artists is explored in a specific section that you can see here. And I just wanted to juxtapose one of the earliest self-portraits of a woman artist. This is by Sophonisba Anguissola, a very important figure created around 1550s with Artemisia Gentileschi. Just look at the differences between both portraits. The way how Sophonisba presents herself in this very sophisticated way as a gentlewoman, very properly dressed. She even describes herself as a Virgo, as a virgin. And then 70 years later, you have Artemisia Gentileschi, who couldn't care less about presenting herself as a virgin. There's another self-portrait by Sophonisba Anguissola. It's very important because she shows herself as an artist, as a painter, unlike Artemisia later on. And this is one of the misgivings. That is a work by a Flemish artist, Catharina van Hemissen, who really started this whole tradition in Europe. And I would have loved to see this work also in the show because she must have influenced Italian women artists as well. In any case, we finish this section with this wonderful portrait by a lesser known artist, Anna Baccarini Piattoli, painted in the mid-18th century. And just to show you quickly the dramatic changes that took place. She's still properly dressed as a woman, of course, sitting upright, looking straight at us. But when you go close to the painting, you will see that this is not a young beauty that is depicting herself any longer. There's no beautification whatsoever at place here. This is a mature woman in her mid-50s who is not shy to show the marks of time on her face. And I just find that simply remarkable, the audacity of a woman at that time to depict themselves in this way, in a similar way as men did for centuries before them. Beyond self-imagery, women created many other portraits. That was really one of their domains, together with still lifes, so-called domestic genres. And we'll start with this wonderful portrait of Sophie Nisba's sister. This is her first recorded work from 1551. She had access to her family members at that time, and so she could ask them to pose for her. There was just this intimacy and familiarity that speaks out of this incredible portrait that shows you something about the importance of families for women artists at that time. Of course, she not only painted family members, she also moved on. There's this wonderful little prince from the Spanish court. Because of her fame, Sophie Nisba was called to join the Spanish court at a later period of her life. And she did it, and she did take care of the princes and princesses. And but she also continued to paint. And because of her unique access to these boys and girls, she knew a little bit about their personality and psychology. And you can see that so finely in this portrait here. This is just one of the most amazing portraits of any child from the 16th century. I mentioned still lifes. Women played a very important role in the development of this genre, which was very young at that time. In the late 16th century, it was just on its way to become a genre on its own. But one of the pioneering artists in it was an artist called Fede Galizia, the very same artist that Chick Austin believed to have acquired. And now when you look at this painting here, and this is undisputable by her, you see how much it differs from our painting upstairs, but it also just shows you her wonderful qualities of sort of minimizing a complex scene, of reducing them to the most important elements. Another important painter of still lifes was Giovanna Garzoni. She specialized on miniatures, and you can see here these hundreds and thousands of tiny little dots and stipples. And that was her signature technique with which she became famous in Italy and even beyond, across Europe at that time. And she could ask incredible prices for these very sophisticated, very carefully executed works of art. The last section that I'm now entering is the section about female heroines, which of course goes back to St. Catherine. And I just want to juxtapose it with one of the most outstanding loans in our exhibition, which is the Mary Magdalene in Ecstasy, which is a work that was only known through an old black and white photography in one archive until 2015, when it resurfaced from a dungeon, basically. And it is one of the most stunning works by Artemisia. It was executed after her portraits in Florence. But it just shows you this, this sensitivity that she had for depicting Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was a very popular subject at that time, as you can imagine. But her interpretation of it is just so raw, it's so full of emotion that it completely stands out. And there is something to be said about a female perspective on female heroines. There's just a different sensitivity, a different lens that women artists probably had on depicting such subjects. You can see that here. You can see her here in a wider context. There are two more depictions of Mary Magdalene, and they are all sort of are meant to show you the relevance of the subject, but also the variety of the different interpretations. What was also important for us was to demonstrate that women artists not only specialized in tiny little niche sectors like miniatures or pastels, but they also actively competed with their male peers. And this is a painting which is huge, which is larger than I am, which Artemisia painted at a later point in her career in Naples. And this is the sort of painting with which she competed actively with her male peers. It's large, it has several figures, it shows a biblical scene. This is what male artists were educated for. This is what they could ask for the highest prices for. She depicts here Bathsheba, who is just bathing herself, and then in the background you see King David, who's just peeping down on her. And there's just this wonderful moment, this sort of it's not a tension, but there is some sort of it's not a friction. It is particular to see a female nude among the many other female nudes that were depicted at that time, but in this case depicted by a woman artist. A woman artist looking at a female nude. It's just something that Artemisia stood out with. There were not many others who were doing that at that time among other women artists, and she was definitely in high demand because of this specialization. And now, just to finish my little tour through the exhibition with you, this is one of the last paintings. It's one of the most glorious works. This is her Judith, together with her maidservant Abra. They had both decapitated Holofernes and are now trying to escape the enemy's camp at night. There's this sudden moment of suspense that is happening here, illuminated by her arm that is raised, and it's just everything is frozen at this time. It's an incredibly complex scene, psychologically deeply charged, and yet everything is suspended in time, so to speak. And the way how Artemisia did this is just masterfully. And it's just an incredible work that shows Artemisia at the height of her time. With this sort of interpretation, which was novel, which was fresh, which was completely unexpected for the viewers at that time, she presented herself in a way that she was not only able to compete with male artists, but she was even able to outdo them. And just think about, we spoke about the female lens earlier. Just look about the role of the head of Holofernes. I mean, this painting is by and large about the teamwork between Judith and her maidservant. Look at the way how they are arranged, and look at the sort of relatively small role of Holofernes, who is here literally at the bottom of the painting. This is about the suspense. This is about the shared moment of these two heroines, of Abra and Judith, who did the right thing, who decapitated Holofernes, sorry, and were now trying to escape. We have another earlier interpretation by another female artist that is hanging close by. This shows you a totally different interpretation of the subject. This shows you Judith as the clear heroine in the foreground, and Abra is sort of the counterpart of Judith. She's old. She does not share Judith's attractiveness any longer. She's literally in the shadows there. And right very close to Judith, you have this head of Holofernes, not really at the bottom. But then what is most remarkable about this painting is, I'm not sure if any one of you noticed that, but there's this beautiful dagger here that Fede Galizia painted. And she knew how to paint daggers because her father was a goldsmith. So she was intimately familiar with those utensils. And on that dagger, it's shiny, but you can see the inscription of her signatures. It must rank as one of the most beautiful signatures in any artwork. It's beautifully, elegantly done. And yet it's impossible not to see a personal statement by Fede Galizia to place her name exactly on the instrument that had just decapitated Holofernes. So I hope that you all agree with me that this is an extremely exciting time we are living in 2021. We are about to rediscover these amazing artists who had been marginalized for such a long time. And now we have all these opportunities to look at them with fresh eyes and to reassess their works. And I hope that you will join me in to celebrate this moment, to celebrate these women artists here at the Wadsworth Atheneum. So thank you very much. Thank you. I fear it became a little bit late, but perhaps one or the other of you has a question. I would... Yes, please. Right. Thank you for that question. I've been thinking about that question for years. You always, as a curator, you have to take so many things into account, and it starts with the very artworks that you have. It starts with the it goes over to the architecture, the very space where you can place the artworks. And so at the very end, we decided to display the art thematically, to break off this group of artworks and just distill the most, in our opinion, most important themes out of that array of artworks. Within those thematic groupings, we try to create some clusters that shows you some works either by the same artist, or perhaps in some other cases, some deliberate juxtapositions in order to show to you that there was a theme that had been practiced among artists for a long, long time. So it was about demonstrating continuities and parallels among artists who had worked at very different places, but also across different times. But at the same time, it was also about to show you important moments in the development of women artists in Italy at that time. Yes, please. Not on the pictures here. She signed some paintings, as far as I know, but not consistently. Once we started hanging the paintings, it just occurred to me that there are so many signed paintings or artworks by women artists, and I had never thought about it before. But I'm just wondering now, and I would like to give this back to you, whether signatures, artistic signatures, played a different role for women artists as for men. If you look at the works of Elisabetta Sirani, who was a leading artist in Bologna in the mid-17th century, you will find many of her works signed in a quite elaborate way, in a quite ingenious way. They're not simply sort of dashed on the canvas, they're really woven into the fabric of the canvas on one side, but then also into the fabric of the story of the subject that is depicted there. It's very carefully done. So I'm still thinking about this, and hopefully we will all know more after the show closes. Maybe last question. Yes, please. So, sorry, I promised to understand you. Wonderful question. The whole question about training is still in large parts an open question. In some cases, we do have answers. In Artemisia Gentileschi's case, now we know how closely she must have looked at her father Orazio because of these three portraits that relate to each other so closely. With other artists, there are still major questions. We know from Sophonisba Anguissola, for instance, this Renaissance artist, that she was privileged and she was sent by her father to be trained by an outside artist who was relatively well known at that time in her town. But that step, to send your daughter outside your home to be trained by another artist, was quite extraordinary and rather reflects something upon the elevated status of Sophonisba Anguissola, who was a noblewoman. Usual women coming from the middle class did not have that sort of privilege. So they had to find either means through their parents who were artists, or means through their friends, or maybe they were trained by some other women artists. We do have a couple of women who were famous students by other women. So there, Wasaba Kayeda, the pastel artist, for instance, and also Elisabetta Sirani. They were both had both eminent workshops in Bologna and in Venice, in which they employed women artists. And those women artists were brought into the workshop at a relatively young age, and then they were educated to emulate the style of the mistress, the style of Wasaba Kayeda and Elisabetta Sirani. Maybe one more question. Sure. I don't know. I think it's a good observation. What one should know is that she did not paint those large paintings on her own. She collaborated with skilled male artists on those. She did, in all likelihood, the figures, so the most prominent parts of those paintings, and then she delegated the minor parts, such as the architecture or the landscape, to those male artists who had been specialized on it. It's again another proof of her savviness, of her business acumen. She simply did not want to lose too much time on painting everything in these large paintings, and so she simply handed them over to these specialist artists. Well, thank you very much.